People love music biopics. Okay, maybe not all of them, but altogether, music biopics are popular and have a place in the public imagination. Whether it's huge budget movies like Bohemian Rhapsody or Michael, or the VH1 Behind the Music documentaries, we like to have our bands and musicians have a cinematic quality story to their lives and work, and we especially like it when it's wrapped up into an entertainment product. We also like it when our musicians are a little bit bad. Whether it's stories of crazy party animals, torrid love affairs, tragic substance abuse, violence, criminality, or insanity, people seem naturally inclined to the darker sides of music celebrities. This extends not only from a tabloid understanding of the hidden lives of pop stars, but also an interest in the truly violent, chaotic, and extremist elements of underground music. From East Coast rap to West Coast rap to Norwegian black metal to Japanese danger music and Gigi Allen, people are just naturally drawn to this stuff. Enter skinheads. Arguably one of the most controversial and misunderstood musical subcultures, the word skinhead has become a byword for hooligan, writer, criminal, and much to the chagrin of Sharp, the Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice, racist. However, all of this ignores that skinheads are really just music fans and part of a subculture, no different than people into hip-hop, stoner rock, heavy metal, or techno. They come in all stripes, and you can't judge them all by a few individuals. If you Google skinhead, you'll get a bunch of results from the Southern Poverty Law Center or general fear-mongering about the so-called threat skinheads pose. Much less talked about is the actual sound of the skinheads, oi music, which this video will go into later somewhat. The actual musical evolution and musical theory of oi and a history of punk rock, ska, reggae, and the far more controversial rock against communism movement isn't really what this video is about, though it will make mention of it. No, this video is less about the musical analysis and theory of 1980s punk rock and oi, and more about the people who made it. And the people who made it back in the 80s, as well as the people who listened to it, well, while I feel that the stereotype of the skinhead as violent criminal political extremist is a stereotype, it does have a kernel of truth to it. Skinhead violence was real. In some places, it continues to be real. And this is a story I want to tell about how the skinhead scene, with everything about it, from the criminal to the comical, from the best to the worst, came to France. And you can't tell the story of oi, skinheads in France, unless you talk about L'Infanterie Sauvage and Jean-Christophe Mam, France's first skinhead son. Now, this entry is not someone you'd find in your usual history book. He is no president, no king, no emperor, nor did he live too long ago. Nonetheless, it is a story of youthful abandon, excitement, art, violence, crime, friendship, and heartache. This is the story of Jean-Christophe Mam and his Infanterie Sauvage. Jean-Christophe Mam was born in the 14th arrondissement of Paris, France on November 15, 1964. His mother was a history professor, his father was an engineer, and his grandfather was an ambassador. Like many Parisians, Jean-Christophe's white-collar family leaned left. His mother openly smoked marijuana. Despite this, Jean-Christophe soon found an obsession with military themes, the working class, and punk rock as he grew up. An important detail to note about Jean-Christophe is that his father was Cambodian and Jean-Christophe was mixed, half white, half Cambodian. When his father left the family, this created a rift in Jean-Christophe's household, and a wound that never really healed in Jean-Christophe. He tried his best to not identify as Cambodian his whole life, and it's not impossible that he later took interest in French and English nationalism in resentment of his Cambodian father. Jean-Christophe and his family would move to Corbeil-Essonnes, a commune just 29 kilometers southwest of Paris, where he would also go to high school. His goal was to become an English professor, his understanding interest in English a recurring motif throughout his life. Soon, however, his life plans would drastically change. Jean-Christophe played drums in a college band called Les Talkatifs, which later became punk act Kremlin Contingent. Around this point in time, he began asking for guitarists at his school, which led him to meeting classmates Mourad, aka Marc Touyouzien, Arnaud, aka Arnaud Châtelain, Philus, and an additional short-lived member named Philippe, all future members of their new band Atomkraft, not to be confused with the English heavy metal band. According to guitarist Mourad, only Philippe knew how to play guitar. They were 16 when Atomkraft began, with Mourad being 2 years older than the rest. Mourad and Philus brought their instruments to start the band up, and Jean-Christophe went about teaching Philus how to drum. It would be Atomkraft that would soon transform into pioneering French oi band L'Infanterie Sauvage. Going further into it, oi refers to a controversial and storied subgenre of punk rock best associated with England's working class, hooligans, and the skinhead subculture. Musically, it takes from reggae, ska, and punk rock, but has heavier guitar riffs, football chant-inspired anthem vocals, and lyrical themes related to violence, toughness, drinking, politics, and the blue-collar lifestyle. A lot of oi and skinhead culture was totally universal. Oi is just hate you pronounced in Cockney English. Et toi is the rough French way of saying hey you aggressively and can also be shortened to oi. However, when Jean-Christophe and his bandmates were starting in Atomcraft, the band's skinhead musical and visual identity had yet to properly be formulated. Eschewing band theatrics and dressing in a proletarian manner, Arnaud and Murad's look were firmly in the oi world, a fashion consisting of boots, usually Doc Martens or Rangers boots, straight-legged jeans, checkered button shirts, jean jackets, and military fatigues. However, at this point in the band's history, Foulous and Géno had crew cuts and mohawks, closer to the Sex Pistols punk realm than skinhead bands like Sham 69. To outsiders, they resembled homeless people, despite having a more straight-laced and clean look compared to the dirtier, sticky-haired crust punk look. This was something Flus's father, however, could never abide. It's worth mentioning here that in 1980, Oi and the skinhead subculture was young and evolving. While already a source of controversy that had continued to draw attention in England, it had not quite yet formalized into a standard look, sound, and ethos, and it would take some time for this to happen in its home country, and even longer outside in places like France. Atomcraft remained a small high school garage band, barely even visiting Paris, let alone touring France and hobnobbing with other punk acts. Kremlin Contingent was the only other punk band in Atomcraft's vicinity, and a French punk or oi fanbase for Atomcraft was simply non-existent at the time of the band's inception. Nonetheless, despite Atomcraft's members taking musical inspiration far and wide, their sound was perfectly punk, and soon would develop not only into oi, but a unique, aggressive take on it that would define France's oi canon. Atomcraft would also be the origin of the band members' nom de plumes, which to this day they are better known by. Arnaud is just a nickname for Arnaud, pronounced the exact same way for my non-French listeners, and Murad was how his classmates heard his Armenian mother call him, a second name for his family, while Marc was his outward-facing name to fit into French society. Foulous comes from fellatio, a role Foulous learned from the first time from a porno magazine. Jean-Christophe would take the name Géno, short for genocide, a name picked perhaps in reference to how consistently skinny Jean-Christophe was throughout his life, but also was a bit of a dark joke referencing Jean-Christophe's Cambodian ancestry. Over time, Atomcraft's name changed to the Wild Xmas Infanterie, reflecting the band's earlier use of English lyrics. As they moved on to French only, the name was translated to L'Infanterie Sauvage, later shortened to L'Infanterie Sauvage, the Savage Infantry. L'Infanterie Sauvage tended to be homebodies, never straying too far from the small town of Menacey where half the band lived. Their collective parents did not disapprove of the band, and the band members' families, having been acquainted with each other through dinners and sleepovers, all knew each other. Most free time was spent practicing band sessions going on for more than 8 hours. Unlike the normally reclusive state of the band, Jeannot began exploring, moving outside of Corbeil-Essonnes, getting vinyls from Paris, as well as taking L'Infanterie to Place d'Italie in Paris's 13th arrondissement to buy bomber jackets, a key piece to the skinhead ensemble. It would also be Jeannot who would be the first and only member of L'Infanterie Sauvage to ever go to London, Oi's Mecca. However, when Jeannot stopped going to school, he was also cut off from Paris, meaning we would now have to import his music. L'Infanterie Sauvage's sound and look would progress. The band appraises their long, delirious practice sessions as contributing to their uniquely rural, proletarian atmosphere, as well as Murad's use of Middle Eastern scales, owing to his Armenian heritage. A chance meeting with Kremlin Contingent, the band which Géno used to drum for, would be a watershed moment that would define French oi forever. After seeing L'Infanterie practice, Kremlin Contingent remarked that they appreciated the band's ideas, but they lacked the ability to properly play their own music. Géno was particularly struck by this comment, but his subsequent reaction was in fact a long time coming. Kremlin Contingent was positive sounding, new wave blended, colorful, artsy, fun, more strawberry switchblade than screwdriver. They were closer to a glam, Parisian flavor of punk. In contrast, L'Infanterie Sauvage was darker, tougher, no nonsense, heavier, and provincial. Inspired by the likes of the band Crass, Jeannot long wanted to completely separate L'Infanterie Sauvage from Kremlin Contingent, the Paris scene, and everything they represented in punk. Thus, L'Infanterie Sauvage officially became an oi band. Jeannot had the band wear matching military uniforms like a real regiment, and when they weren't, L'Infanterie would be in boots and braces. All this despite L'Infanterie not even having enough money to afford such clothes. Green blousons served as mock bomber jackets at one point, and Géno would steal his sister's cassette tapes and record L'Infanterie's music over them. This change not only cemented L'Infanterie Sauvage's sound, but the band's skinhead ethos, and Géno's eventual fall from grace, moments that would not only forever change Géno's life, but the lives of those around them. In June 1982, L'Infanterie Sauvage would have their very first concert in Evry, a suburb of Paris. Soon after, Géno sent a cassette of L'Infanterie's music to Radio Brie for the radio program Sauve Qui Punk, and later, he had his own show, recorded in his sister's room for an episode of Polly Magoo on Menacé's Radio Val. As L'Infanterie Sauvage's first successes progressed and Géno dived deeper and deeper into the skinhead world, the initial political cracks between the group began to cement. Just like Géno's family, L'Infanterie Sauvage was firmly left-wing. Foulous's father was a member of the Socialist Party. Arnaud was a card-carrying young communist, and though Mourad had positioned himself away from communism due to the USSR's treatment of Armenians, he considered himself a proud anarchist. Perhaps in youthful rebellion against his parents and the French college scene's Marxist establishment, or perhaps having been tuned into the London scene's reactionary currents, Géno had come out as an anti-communist. Still, at this point in the band's history, there was no political squabbling between Géno and the others. White nationalist skinheads emerging in the UK, a schism that continues to divide Oi punk to this day, were barely on the radar of French punks, and Géno's skinhead persona stuck to celebrating the proletariat, something that gelled well with Arnaud and Mourad, authentic working class people, and the general left-wing atmosphere of Géno's surroundings. Politics in L'Infanterie Sauvage's lyrics at this point manifested into anti-Mitterrand rhetoric, France's center-left soft socialist president between 1981 and 1995, and using military themes such as the motto Honneur et Patria, honor and country, to criticize militarism itself. Another aspect of L'Infanterie Sauvage was that they were neither truly skinhead nor punk, but rather skunk, their own nomenclature for a mix of the two. The band advocated coexistence and common ground between skinheads and punks, aided by their distinct musical style which blended oi and street punk elements together. Warfare and combat terminology would continue to fascinate Géno, as would the working class themes which were so central to skinhead culture. Perhaps it's because they were from a world foreign to Géno. Géno had come from a blue blood family and never truly worked himself. Though he was knowledgeable on firearms, he was opposed to militarism. He always looked to England for inspiration, but his own life was far removed from that of the oi bands he revered. Géno knew nothing of football, and his asthma, meager frame, and inability to fight his own battles, Mourad did most of the fighting for him, meant that he was never particularly physically active. It is possible that Géno's further exploration of military themes and wanting to associate himself with the tougher, more dangerous aspects of skinhead identity could have come from a need to compensate for lack of actual strength or real blue-collar experience. L'Infanterie Sauvage, after rigorous band practices, set about a skinhead and punk lifestyle, drinking and fighting. Mourad teetotaled, yet was known for having a furious temper. Foulouse was known not to be able to hold his liquor at all, and was a violent drunk, looking for fights wherever he could. Foulouse's aggression would get the band kicked out of a bar after recording and playing with punk act RAS, leading the group to get lost in Dunkirk. The group would try to keep Foulouse separated from alcohol, but whereas he was an angry and disoriented drunk, Géno was a friendly one. According to Arnaud, Géno could handle booze even less than Foulouse, and was remarked by Arnaud to have tried to have gone swimming on a carpet. Swimming and drunkenness would be a grim foreshadowing for Géno's future. In 1983, Géno would drum in a side project called BKS, a rockabilly project that utilized explicit Nazi imagery such as Reichsadlers on their t-shirts. The Nazi themes, however, were for shock and humor purposes only. Géno had become firmly entrenched into the world his band had created. He sought to live the rest of his life off of his music and his artwork. Géno resisted the educated, collegiate French world he was born into, the world where he would thrive most. He wanted to live a more authentic, working-class life of the skinhead artists, rebelling against the elite social and political norms of those around him. To his friends and bandmates, he was merely playing at proletariat. The first major disagreement among L'Infanterie Sauvage was in the song J'irai revoir ma Normandie, I'll see my Normandy again, which would soon be put in their self-titled first album. Géno's lyrics, all my life I'll defend the colors of the French Lys, the blue, the white, and the red, caused disapprobation with Mourad and Arnaud. While the French colors here are accurate, the fleur-de-lis has nothing to do with the republic the French tricolor is associated with. The fleur-de-lis was the emblem of the French royal houses of Capet, Valois, and Bourbon, In other words, a symbol of monarchist France, totally antipodal to France after the Revolution. The same song featured the words anti-red, which Murad and Arnaud also disliked. Lyrics such as these that involved French jingoism were played ironically by L'Infanterie Sauvage as slights against nationalism, but the inclusion of the fleur-de-lis, often associated with French monarchists, traditionalists, and rightists, seemed to err on the side of genuine French patriotism and militarism. Around this time, Murad and Arnaud note that Géno often complained of France's treatment of their soldiers after using them like tools, a sentiment often echoed in their left-wing circles, but now reminiscent of fascist and nationalist rhetoric. The song Un pays à défendre, a country to defend, references this idea of disrespect to heroic soldiers, but applying it just to France, whereas L'Infanterie Sauvage as a whole portrayed it as a universal phenomenon. The song Je pense à la Russie, I think of Russia, explores the sentiment from a Soviet soldier's perspective. An argument began around Un pays à défendre. Géno defended himself as no fascist, but rather an internationalist, who respected nationalism from every country. At this point in time, the fissure between right-leaning and left-leaning skinheads had already existed, but the exact party lines and stances were unclear. Communism had not necessarily been claimed by all left skinheads yet, and while French anarcho-punks were vehemently anti-nationalist, nationalist fascism in one country could be revolutionary liberation in another. The working-class Oi anthem, Ayo Ayo, caused a fight between Géno and Bourrier Noir's anarcho-punk guitarist Laurent when it was played live on stage. Despite Géno's lyrics keeping punk platitudes in common with Murad and Arnaud, Géno was slowly but surely moving to the right. Perhaps this was because of his ability and fondness for English. Géno was cognizant of English skinhead trends the other band members were not, including the nationalist push away from punk's leftism. Following collaborations with the band RAS, neo-Nazi and nationalist skinheads began showing up at L'Infanterie Sauvage shows, including the seminal nationalist Oi band Tolbiac Toad's vocalist Bruno. At a gig with regular collaborators, RAS, right-wing skinheads interrupted the show with baseball bats. Around L'Infanterie Sauvage, a band that emerged in France when punk was barely existent and the skinhead subculture was incredibly marginal and underground, the heated conflict between right-wing and left-wing skins was beginning to appear. This divide continues to embroil skinheads to this day. Still, L'Infanterie Sauvage were playing shows and recording music. In 1983, L'Infanterie Sauvage took more from ska music for their sound. Ska is a reggae-inspired, fast-tempo music with a brass section and rock and roll instrumentation. It originated from Jamaica, but then became huge in the UK, going on to inspire elements of punk and skinhead culture. Géno chafed under this new sound, and so his new side project, Colditz, became an outlet. Colditz was directly inspired by Screwdriver, arguably one of the most infamous, if not the most infamous, British neo-Nazi Oi bands of all time. Screwdriver is believed to have pioneered RAC, or Rock Against Communism, a subgenre of Oi punk firmly set in the far right. After openly referencing Screwdriver around Murad and Arnaud, Géno drifted further away from the rest of L'Infanterie Sauvage. Still, 1984 would see the release of the classic EP Chansons à boire, Drinking Songs, and was followed by two albums, a self-titled and the eloquently named Oi. All of these were self-released with no aid or interference from the record label. Now, Géno spent more and more time in Paris with new skinhead friends, far from his band. He practiced with them less as well. Géno's new skinhead friends got into fights with his old punk friends who frequented L'Infanterie shows. Said friends would also perform Roman salutes at the venue. The writing was on the wall, and now Murad, Arnaud, and Falouz were interested in quitting the band proper. After one last gig, L'Infanterie Sauvage was over, and from its ashes, Colditz continued, and Géno's new project reared its head, Totenkopf. Formed in 1985, Totenkopf was an explicitly National Socialist band. They released but one album and was altogether short-lived. The band shared members with another Géno NS side project, Legion 88. Meanwhile, the other members of L'Infanterie Sauvage left to do other things. Falouz would move on to a new wave band, Paris Londres. Arnaud would join hardcore band Chromosome 4 with featured RAS member Taki as a guitarist, who, when you know it, went on to be the voice of Yusuke Urameshi on the French dub of Yu Yu Hakusho. Murad was the only member of L'Infanterie Sauvage to actually enlist in the military. Despite his obsession with the army, Géno would follow a different path. With Totenkopf, Legion 88, and additional mingling within the French and British RAC scenes, Géno was now always hanging out with the clique of neo-Nazi and far-right skinheads. He had fully embraced not only the politics that came with the RAC scene, particularly the British scene, but also an outlaw look. He had tattooed the word skinhead on his forehead, added a cross between his eyebrows, and even a heraldic lion on his cheek. In 1986, Géno and a gang of skinheads burnt down a French Communist Party headquarters in Juvisy. He was arrested and sent to prison, being released in April or May of that year. After his arrest, he could no longer play in Legion 88, and Totenkopf ceased to be. Sometime following this, he reconnected with Murad, who had always served as a sort of big brother to him and the rest of L'Infanterie. Over a conversation, Géno relayed that he never, ever wanted to return to prison. Murad speculates that he could have been assaulted or at the least singled out for his tattoos and horribly beaten while behind bars. Géno admitted to losing all interest in the neo-Nazi skinhead movement, as well as an interest in having his tattoos removed. Prison had changed him. Despite the arson, splitting up the band, and becoming a person they could in no way recognize, Murad and Arnaud still look back on Géno and their accomplishments with L'Infanterie Sauvage fondly. Géno was a skinny rake of a kid, often in over his head and thought to be merely posing as a tough guy. But he was also deeply funny, imaginative, creative, talented, and playful. Murad and Arnaud described him as someone who could tell a tall tale at any given moment, who could improvise jokes on the fly, someone who was perhaps better suited to be a comedian than a skinhead. His sister has spoken about Geno's darker side, something she said was always in him. According to her parents, Geno had issues with anger, depression, and destructive behavior, perhaps originating with their parents' divorce at a young age, though she describes this rage as always pointed at himself more than anybody else. Regardless of his controversial politics and the arson incident, L'Infanterie Sauvage was one of the single most important bands in both French Oi and punk. Emerging in the time when Oi, skinhead, and punk culture was still a barely defined primordial soup of emerging musical motifs, identities, and violent political schisms which will still last to this day, as to most skinhead chagrin, the word skinhead is associated with neo-Nazis and not an anti-racist, reggae-inspired punk subculture. L'Infanterie Sauvage was profoundly influential and trailblazing. Their music, even at its muddiest and rawest in terms of production, is adrenaline-pumping, gritty, uncompromising, yet youthful and optimistic. L'Infanterie Sauvage's work is simultaneously incredibly outsider, yet also lovingly made and well-crafted, and all this was made possible by Murad's expert guitar playing, Arnaud's fast-paced bass, and Farouz's genre-defining drumming. It is also defined, of course, by Geno's roaring vocals, simultaneously hooligan chant, working-class anthem, and revolutionary war cry. It is astonishing to think about how much L'Infanterie Sauvage contributed to punk and oi as a whole in a small French town in Paris' shadow, with only as many punks and skinheads as you could throw a brick at, especially at a time where few knew or even cared about this subculture music, and even few were willing to put up with its baggage. 2 months after reuniting with Murad, on June 17, 1986, Jean-Christophe Géno drowned in la Loire River in Orleans while drunk. His drinking habit had to have worsened, and as usual, Géno could not handle his liquor. It was only natural that while inebriated, Geno's first inclination was to go into the water. His whole life, he loved to swim.
Dans les nuages, avec Saint-Pierre, ici sauvage, en pensant à ses chars passés, ses amis qui l'ont vite oublié. Parfois le soir quand il sommeille, insomnie, un murmure qui t'éveille, bruit de bottes sur un parterre de rue, œil qui flotte dans de clairs de lune. Souviens-toi de lui, c'était le chanteur de l'infanterie. On l'aimait pas, il était neuf. Souviens-toi de lui. Souviens-toi de lui. C'était le chanteur de l'infanterie.